From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Fellow conspiracy realists, before we get started this evening, we want to make sure everyone tunes in to our exclusive interview with Arkasha Stevenson, director of The First Omen. You can catch it only in theaters, April 5th. It's a question humanity has quarreled with since before the dawn of the written age. What is the nature of good? What is the nature of evil? For some folks, it's a matter of shifting perspectives, a long spectrum of gradients. For others, there are absolutes, clearly defined rights and wrongs, clear good guys, clear bad guys, and with that in mind, tonight we are exploring one of history's most extreme symbols of evil, the opposite of divinity, a dark oppositional messiah, the eternal enemy of God and Jesus Christ, known for millennia as the Antichrist. Here are the facts. The Antichrist has done a lot for fiction.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I've always kind of struggled with, like, is the Antichrist in service of Satan? Is the Antichrist like Satan incarnate, like in the way that Jesus is God on earth? You know, like what's that relationship? Is it the son of the devil? It is in some fiction, right? Mm-hmm. Very much so.
In some, it's weird to think of it as between nonfiction and fiction, because
I'm thinking Rosemary's Baby, just in terms of son of the devil, is like the Antichrist.
No, you're absolutely right. It's just in my mind, even when I'm trying to separate the fictional depictions of what we would consider an Antichrist versus like letters that were written, you know, in 950 AD that are concerning an Antichrist based on, you know, scriptures that person takes to be absolute fact.
This individual.
Right. Literal interpretation. Yeah. And I'm glad we're bringing that point up at the top, because as we always want to say when we explore concepts like this, bit of a spiritual disclaimer, your beliefs are your own. We're not here to tell anyone what they should or should not believe, but we do find a fascinating, surprising bevy of conspiracies in tales of the Antichrist. I mean, I think it's fair to say that even if you don't consider yourself Christian in particular or religious in general, you have heard about the concept of the Antichrist in clear seminal works of fiction, some of the best horror films, some of the best horror novels on the planet, some of the best art, in fact, if we're getting pretentious.
Music.
It's about the Antichrist. Yeah. Shout out Sex Pistols.
Superstar by Marilyn Manson. Again, that guy sucks. But that was like, he kind of peaked, you know, in terms of the concept album with Antichrist Superstar.
There is one, I'm glad you mentioned music too there, because there is one line that stood out to me. I returned to it with the Sex Pistols, where they say, they don't say I am the Antichrist. They say I am an Antichrist, which will be interesting later. So anyway, the question is, and also in real life over millennia, there have been numerous people who at various times claimed that they themselves were the Antichrist, you know, and maybe that's what Marilyn Manson's picking up on there.
Well, and let's point this out. I think we've talked about this before, but biblically, from passages of the Bible, there's very specific ones that paint anybody who does not follow Jesus, believes that Jesus is the Son of God, and says that out loud to people, is Antichrist, or is it's weird because it's the term "the" is what you end up like trying to like quarreling over, and it's what historians end up talking about. Is that passage talking about the Antichrist or an Antichrist or just of the Antichrist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know? So the best way to explain it is like there's an individual and then there's a vibe and then there are opening acts. So if your vibe is off, you are being not an or the, but you're being Antichrist. You're being unchristian.
But then in Thessalonians, it goes on to talking about basically being a minister of the Antichrist, or a worker of the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting because in some of those places there doesn't require to be an individual at all. It is just an act or as you said, a vibe.
Yeah. So the Antichrist, again, polar opposite of Jesus Christ, according to Christian tradition. So everything Jesus Christ represents, the Antichrist is super against. He thinks it's all a terrible idea if it's the individual, the main Antichrist. And this guy has a grift. He has a grand conspiracy. He's going to take over the world, reign over the earthly world in the time before the last judgment. And in Christian theology, the last judgment is when Jesus and a divine army and the angels return. The dead are resurrected. So comes God to judge the living and the dead. And I like the point where we're talking about the complexity of the concept. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The Antichrist is often, at least the singular, like final boss. Antichrist is the son of Satan in a dark parody of the nature of God and Jesus. So there's a lot of misogyny in here, and also a lot of anti-Semitism. Just to get in front of that.
Oh, yeah. Is the concept of the Antichrist as the son of Satan specifically addressed in Scripture?
Oh, man, I'm glad you asked. So there are specific interpretations of Scripture that would say that. So, like, it's strange because for a guy, and it's almost always typified as a guy, for a guy who plays such a big role in the grand climactic events of reality and the universe, it might surprise some of us to learn that there are only a scant number of passages, like 3 passages in the New Testament, that specifically mention the Antichrist in a singular sense. Like, there is a guy, he is evil. They all come from the letters of John.
Yeah, they're interesting. Should we read some of them?
Yeah.
Here is 1 John chapter 2, verse 18 and 19. Dear children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they did not really belong to us, for if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us, but their going showed that none of them belonged to us.
Dude, this really feels just like being referring to a lot of people that are maybe following someone who is speaking out against Jesus and the message of Christianity.
Again, I keep going back to, and I don't mean to be crass, I keep going back to the idea of escalating spiritual arms races, or even more basically, an opening act of a genre of music before the big headliner, which is the Antichrist. So we say there are a lot of things. It's very Cold War. It's very them versus us paranoia.
Oh, yeah. Let me give you one more passage here. Just 1 John chapter 4, because I think it speaks to exactly that. 1 John chapter 4, verse 2. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world.
So like a Lovecraftian monster or some kind of spiritual contagion, this thing's decay, its apostasy spreads. And I want to go to, just to round it out, right? 2 John 7, I think, the other notable passage talking about Antichrist stuff, expounds on this and says, for many deceivers have gone out into the world, men who will not acknowledge the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist, even though John clearly thinks there's more than one.
And last one, this one is I think speaks to, again, that other perspective, because we're seeing kind of versions of this that can be easily interpreted as that Leviathan coming, this actual force. And then there's ones like this that almost feel a little more political. Who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist. He who denies the Father and the Son. No one denies the Son has the Father. He who confesses the Son has the Father also. This to me is just about like adhering to doctrine and like, kind of othering people who are not in that particular religious clique, And
it sounds like we may have given you 4 quotes, but again, these all we're clipping out the passages that we mentioned here, and you can see the confusion because already we're reading this in modern American English, and it's been translated so many times before it got here.
Exactly. The ones I read were New International Version, by the way, which is like the more easily translated to other languages, which is why that version was created.
Yeah. I mean, what, you don't mess with the King James?
I will. I mean, I dig a King James every once in a while. It's kind of fun. But yeah, there's so many versions of the Bible.
And the one I read was from 1 John chapter 2, verse 22 and 23. A quick mention of the Antichrist there. So
again, it's scant. In its specificity. And early Christians agreed with us. So they would do this. They would pore over other parts of the Bible as it evolved through different translations and interpretations, and they would interpret different passages as referring to this villain. Think of things like the letters of Paul. In Paul, they don't specifically say the Antichrist, but they say the man of lawlessness, the son of perdition. You know what I mean? It's kind of like saying a certain Russian president.
Exactly. The first
like a subtweet.
The first time I heard "son of perdition," I always think about "Road to Perdition." I don't know why Tom Hanks is on the brain.
Western too. I picture the Man in Black from The Gunslinger.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why.
Dude, totally. But "son of perdition," I didn't know that term. I didn't understand it, and I found that it's the letter. The letter on the origin time of the Antichrist from Adoso of Montirandere, where he talks about the son of perdition, but specifically as that title, basically, the man of lawlessness, of sin.
Oh, yeah. Perdition is bad. It's eternal damnation, right?
Yeah. And Adso, we'll get to, is very good at cementing the idea of the Antichrist for the public. I mean, it's also weird that the Christian concept of the Antichrist comes from beliefs that predate the concept of Christianity itself. If you go back to Jewish traditions, the book of Daniel, that was written like 167 BCE loosely, then the author there predicts that there will be what they call a final persecutor arising. A villain who will, quote, speak great words against the Most High and wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change time and laws. That's 725.
Is this end of days type situation?
Yeah. This is like big third act energy.
Yeah. And big rapture vibes.
Right. And as we will see later, then as now, a lot of people were absolutely certain, were making a base assumption that the world would end in their lifetime. Yeah. That nobody wants to feel like you were in one of the, one of the less good seasons of the human experience. You want to be there when something climactic occurs.
One of the spinoffs that went straight to DVD.
Right. Nobody wants to be in those. So, I mean, if you look at the political context of the time in which the book of Daniel was written, this is interesting because it appears the author is referring to a specific human individual, a real pill, to be fair, named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And Antiochus rules Palestine during the Hellenistic period and is super mean to Jewish communities, persecuting them, massacring them, trying to root them out of Palestine. But when Daniel writes this, it is a sneak diss. It's what we would call a subtweet today because the author never mentions Antiochus by name. And this establishes a pattern that we could argue continues today. New threats, tyrants, villains, other generally unpleasant people come on the
Obama.
stage. Barack Obama.
Thanks, Obama.
Right. Every president, actually, since FDR, except for, weirdly enough, Gerald Ford, which I still don't understand. He's the one who didn't get called the Antichrist.
Wasn't Gerald Ford the president who had 2 assassination attempts on his life by women? Like, is that wrong? I thought that was it. Maybe I'm wrong.
He was also POTUS during the height of one of the cyclical Antichrist panics in the 1970s. Anyway, so because this pattern has been established, when you are living your life and you're reading this as a member of the faithful, then you will see your own story written in these things. You will tend to interpret these ancient passages in ways that center yourself and your own life experience. So it makes sense that someone would read John or, read parts of Daniel and hear about it and think, oh, that makes sense. It is going to be the end of the world while I'm alive. And I do know the guy who's the Antichrist. In the days of early Christianity, they would say it's insert Roman emperor here.
Oh, yeah, that's convenient. Yeah. I mean, it's like witchcraft, it's like a witch hunt kind of situation.
Well, yeah, and it got more and more specific, and that ADSO person that we mentioned before, the monk, the Benedictine monk, he got real specific with it, even saying that this Antichrist is going to come from Babylon, like definitely going to be born in Babylon,
The tribe of Dan.
Exactly, because of the whole pagan thing. And also, he's real specific about the Roman Empire, as you're talking about. Basically, in this letter from 950 AD saying, this time when the Antichrist arises and all this stuff, the end of days, the last days, it's not going to happen until all of the peoples and countries that were once ruled by Rome are no longer ruled by Rome. Yeah. It's weird.
And he was also super anti-Semitic. He was like, first things first, the Antichrist is definitely Jewish.
Well, yeah, but it's super specific, right?
From the tribe of Dan, born in Babylon, raised in the ways of wizards and magicians.
Yeah.
So is what's depicted in Revelation concerning the Antichrist, like with the whore of Babylon and all of
the great beast of the abyss,
the great
and the
beast?
seas.
Yeah, I mean all the stuff where people claim 666 comes from. Is there like any association, or are those unrelated?
It's often, there's often an association, or again, an interpretation. Because after seeing specific mentions of Antichrist vibes or a specific Antichrist, people are reading into this. So they'll find a villainous force that seems vague in the text, and then they'll say, boom, that is the Antichrist. And depending on where they're living, what their life is like at the time, they will often, as we'll see, have a specific person who is alive at the same time that they think is the Antichrist. This is not cynical propaganda for the most part, which is so weird. It's not made in bad faith. People making these claims, the vast majority, until pretty recently in history, they interpreted the Bible literally, and they genuinely believed the person they were calling the Antichrist was a supervillain. Did have superpowers, was supernatural, and was the main antagonist of Jesus Christ.
Man, did you see the thread running through a lot of these things, some of these writings where the Antichrist, at least to a secular world and society, the Antichrist would be seen as a very positive force, at least at first, as this person emerges, which is something that Adso also talks about. Like, he will be of the world, right? And the world will love him.
He'll be accepted as first a secular power, and then he will be gradually accepted as a messianic power. So like first you become the king of Jerusalem, right? Adso starts this. He's the one who says the Antichrist will rule over Jerusalem, and then he will, by hook or by crook, become a spiritual leader, ultimately declaring himself divinity.
But the idea is that with all of this, it's sort of like a frog in boiling water situation of being corrupted, right? Like the public is being swayed by this individual and turned to godless ways, but like a little at a time where they barely notice. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. But just going back to what you had talked about earlier, Noel, Adso in his letter here, I'm just going to read a part of this because it goes back to how is this thing created, this Antichrist, right? Is it like Jesus was, born with the Holy Spirit going into Mary? He says, he will be born from the union of a mother and father, like other men, not, as some say, from a virgin alone. Still, he will be conceived wholly in sin, will be generated in sin, and will be born in sin. But at the very beginning of his conception, the devil will enter his mother's womb at the same moment. Ew. So it's as though it's like, the way a baby is created,
transmigration,
the human way, but there's a third party there.
It just pops in, last minute.
IVF, infernal vitro fertilization.
But he's not saying that the devil had intercourse with a mortal woman either.
It depends on which. So Adso is like, okay, this is in a way, and we're not making any religious judgments, but the way this story grows, it's helpful to look at the way folklore evolves, right? Mm-hmm. Or oral storytelling, because again, the written documentation in the beginning is very, very scant. Adso creates one of the big resurgences of this. He's like when Coca-Cola cements the image of Santa Claus. He provides the hard ground rules for how the West and indeed other parts of the world envision this idea of the Antichrist. He puts in this 7-year rule. He says, all right, either the angel Gabriel or the returned Jesus Christ is going to defeat this guy, and then the final judgment is happening as soon as all those Roman countries are gone.
Well, show us your notes, Guy. Where's all this coming from?
Well, there's a really great. Oh gosh, was it on NPR? It was an old PBS website that you can find right now where the entire letter is written out. And there are places where it's cited, like Psalms 57 is cited when it says that this Antichrist will be conceived wholly in sin. And then John 9:34 is cited. And there's biblical...
but it's a leap, though. I mean, the guy's editorializing, to say the least.
Again,
right?
it's interpretation. But I want to say with this, with Adso's interpretation, again, Adso of Montier Ender, with this one letter, by the way, we see immensely high-stakes stuff. And as time wends on, these stories grow deeper. People are taking notes from each other. It takes off in another cycle of resurgence during the Middle Ages in Western Europe. And it resounds still in the modern day and indeed to the future. So with all that context, folks, before we go to our ad break, let's ask you this. Who is the Antichrist? We'll be right back. Here's where it gets crazy. Who is the Antichrist? Single question, simple question. It has conjured a library of Alexandria's worth of conspiracies.
And I mean, it also, as may have been indicated by some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, has been used as a political tool. Like, depending on what side of the aisle you're on as to who your Antichrist might be.
Yeah. Really quickly, you guys want to rattle off some of the movies that deal with the Antichrist before we get into like who it could actually be? Just like rattle them off. Because I forgot that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, End of Days, dealt directly with the Antichrist.
Yeah. Warlock is an absolute banger. There are
Stigmata. Remember
Day
that
of the
one?
Beast. I remember that
Devil's
one.
Advocate.
Devil's Advocate. First off, that's the best one. I can't say that. It's my favorite, though.
Yeah.
Who you carrying all those bricks for, Kevin? God.
God is an absentee landlord.
Dude.
I'm a humanist.
Dude,
Maybe the last humanist. Sorry, I did that monologue.
It's right.
I had
I'm
a
sorry,
traveling
Ben.
show.
I didn't mean to steal that line. It's
Sorry,
one of
that's
my
great.
favorites.
Well, but again, like
Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah,
you
the
know?
Left Behind series. Paul was mentioning that before we even started rolling.
And we'll talk
That's
about
rapture
that too.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that? And like the leftovers,
but Antichrist is heavily involved in there.
Sure.
Well, in the Omen series is something I was really thinking about.
Yeah. And also shout out to Angel Heart. So
Angel Heart's great.
Otherwise, we're going to get emails. Angel Heart is great. That egg scene makes me so uncomfortable still.
No, it's wild. And, the Omen, I recently rewatched the 70s Omen, the OG one, Damien, and it really holds up. I mean, it's just it's that era of like horror movies with Rosemary's Baby, and that was just a very kind of almost cinema verite approach to horror. A lot of stuff happening in your head. They don't show you too much, but it really gets under your skin.
Well, I forgot that series takes you from like the birth of the Antichrist into the second movie.
He becomes the president.
Well, no, the second movie, he's a kid like at a military school, and things get real dark. And then he becomes a man in the third movie and just wreaks havoc. But man, that's just crazy.
Yeah, and so this resounds through the world of fiction and through the world of art, as we said earlier. When we ask that single question that we came back on, who is the Antichrist, we have to point out the Antichrist is tons of people, depending on who you ask. There could be multiple Antichrists. And at this point, you might think, here we go. Everybody's got a multiverse these days. But this is different because biblical sources, again, differentiate between a main Antichrist and other junior varsity Antichrist, some of whom are already in the world. And I think that distinction kind of explains the later and present practice of labeling folks as an Antichrist. You might not be the great beast, but you're super down with him and you're not fooling us. This is the idea.
But I mean, to your point, it is such a, depending on where you stand and what your belief systems are, there are obvious candidates that kind of emerge, throughout history and throughout the world in terms of folks that follow that kind of trajectory, right? That we were talking about, the sort of ascending as a person of the people, and then being lifted up by, society and affecting great change, and then gradually plummeting the world into darkness. But that part, we haven't exactly necessarily seen that happen yet.
So in a way, these folks get portrayed as sort of the infernal answer to the divine armies of Christ and God. They're like officers in a enemy army of damnation. And a lot of
ministers, right?
Right.
Basically going out and preaching the Antichrist message.
Proselytizers, evangelicals. And so an early example of this comes from the Middle Ages. This was a great time for Antichrist promotion. There's a Calabrian monk named Joachim of Fior, and he pitches the idea of a series. You can call them opening acts, Antichrist, for the big Antichrist show. And he says, look, what we're looking at is a cavalcade of people, an escalation. And he says, folks like Nero, folks like Muhammad, the actual prophet Muhammad from Islam, folks like Saladin, these are all Antichrist leading up to the emergence of the big bad. And like a lot of Middle Ages writers, he believed the real Antichrist, the big one, would of course come in his society during his lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any major figure that pushes people away from what that person would consider a Christ-centered life and the Word of God and how a human should live and the things they should believe in, right? So anybody that pushes that message and pushes you further away from that is Antichrist. One of these ministers, and then the main one is eventually comes to power, right? But there's another theme here that it's power over the world, not of a country or something.
That's up to interpretation too. And again, is highly linked to politics and geopolitics and all of these interlocking complex systems. And also depending on where you are in the world, what affiliation you have. It's also up to interpretation and easily weaponized. It's fascinating.
Yeah, as secularism rises in the stories, all early Christians agree there's one great big bad. As secularism rises, as people go away from God, lose their belief in God, this individual swoops in opportunistically, deceiving people with apparent miracles, taking over positions of earthly power, like all the known world type stuff, and then spiritual power, and then finally claiming to be God themselves. And I want to be very clear here. The idea of secularism rising or turning people from God, that doesn't just mean saying atheism or there's no God. That can mean very minor doctrinal disagreements.
I mean, just think the difference in the wars that were started with the disagreement between Protestantism and Catholicism. A lot of basic similarities there, but some very specific things that cause people to murder each other.
Well, think about, just listen to ourselves talking about this, guys. You can see why someone who believes wholeheartedly in some of the core beliefs here would see something like the United Nations, right? Or the World Health Organization, or anything that's bringing the entire world together in some secular way, how you could view those potentially as negative entities and organizations, right?
Sure, and we'll get to that because we'll see another complex fold in of conspiratorial folklore in this.
Well, I think it's the all or nothing nature of religious belief and the fact that it inherently has this adversarial quality with people of other religious beliefs who believe their thing just as much as you believe your thing. And therefore, we are not the same and we must war. If we can't convert you to our thing, then you are our enemy. And so it's almost like the introduction of secularism, while today feels a very innocuous thing, but to some I'm sure it doesn't, then was tantamount to heresy, you know? The idea of secularism, godlessness is what that translates to.
Well, yeah, and this is, again, like we said earlier, this is an us versus them mentality. And we have to understand, like, as weird and literally apocalyptic as this may sound, during the later Middle Ages, if you're the average person in many communities, you just accept as fact that the Antichrist, the main one, is about to reign on earth in your lifetime. Pretty much any overly successful political figure that you disagree with might be the Antichrist, or the Antichrist might already be here. The final judgment may be nigh. It's a level of paranoia resembling the Cold War and the threat of nuclear weapons. Like, people genuinely thought this was happening. It wasn't until the 16th century that folks stopped thinking of this as a present or coming imminent terrible individual and thought of the Antichrist as a collective body of evil. And we owe all of that to a guy named Martin Luther. Pretty big deal to Protestantism. He's the guy, he did a lot of stuff. He also said, look, folks, fight the real enemy. Said the Antichrist is not a single pope. The institution of the papacy, this organization, is the Antichrist. And that's what's driving us away from God. And the thing is, I mean, it sounds weird today, right? To say like the Catholic Church, which is responsible for Christianity, is also Antichrist-like. But once you get that paranoia in play, anyone can be a villain.
I've heard several people posit that the Vatican really is the last remnant of the Roman Empire. And that is how the Roman Empire continued on, and that's how it still is able to exert a lot of power. Maybe that's wrong. That does seems like there's something to that the Holy Roman Empire still exists, but as the papacy.
But even more so, it seems like there's definitely something to how much these declarations by Martin Luther caused Catholics and Protestants to truly despise each other. Like, I've been watching that show Shogun on FX, which is a remake of like an older miniseries based on a novel about, invading forces into Japan. It was these Protestant, this Protestant ship who were going to, try to take over this part of Japan, which is being held by Catholic Portuguese monks, and they absolutely hate each other and want to murder each other on sight.
Yeah. Again, us versus them. LJ, I got a little bit lost because I'm trying to remember one of the best shows I saw it was out on Netflix. It's a TV series about addiction and possession. And one of the big plot lines, I guess it's okay to say it because I don't remember the name of this. One of the big plot lines is active conspiracies within the Catholic Church, right? The call is coming from inside the house. And people believe this, and if you're a Protestant and much of what you have witnessed in your life experience seems to be corruption, right? And sin on behalf of the Catholic Church, then you are going to fall into othering, and now look, now the Catholic Church as it exists is less inclined to identify the Antichrist or an Antichrist as a specific coming individual, but there have been a lot of candidates. We mentioned Barack Obama. I found it interesting. We're talking about this a little bit off air. There was a 2013 poll that showed, there's a great Guardian article about this. It showed roughly 1 in 4 Americans believed Obama might be the Antichrist.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of that goes back to how he brought so many people together. It seemed as though, right, his message was very positive, was about helping each other out, working together. We can do positive things, as a collective of humanity. They didn't see it maybe as very Christ-like or biblical, right?
How is this guy so successful?
Yeah.
He can't just be trying to do his best at his job. It's got to be
popular,
Satan.
I think. How is he so popular?
Why do people like him? I bet it's the devil. And they said stuff like that about Napoleon, Benito Mussolini,
of course.
Peter the Great,
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks. You could kind of name anybody. Like, I'm sure there's someone right now who watched The Family Guy and thought it's Seth MacFarlane.
I've been accused of being the Antichrist 3 times already this week.
Oh no.
No, I'm joking. I'm not high profile enough to be accused of being the Antichrist, but it does show that this kind of talk is being thrown around pretty fast and loose, when it comes to identifying the ultimate enemy of a given group.
Yeah, it's often in the modern day in the West, it's often leveraged by what we would call factions of conservative Christianity. And these are, for everybody tuning in, practitioners of the Christian faith, when you hear that, obviously we're talking about the people that you at your church would call crazy, like the really far out there folks. And for a while, again, except for Gerald Ford, for some reason, for a while, every single president has been accused by someone of being the Antichrist. John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, it knows no political ideology. Henry Kissinger had the top slot for a long, long time in the 70s and 80s.
I bet you supported that.
I did. I do. And Mikhail Gorbachev was also a front runner for a time because he was in charge of the USSR, and he had a very unique and distinct birth mark of the beast.
Mark of the beast.
Oh,
thank you. Yes.
It's so funny. There's only one person who could possibly right now be the Antichrist, and I would fall for it.
Oh boy.
And I would fall for it. Okay, there's 2.
So there are 2. Okay.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is one. No, actually, that's not true. That's not true. I really like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but
I'm
I
not
wouldn't
saying
follow
I don't
him.
like him. I love the guy.
I wouldn't follow him, but it worries me that I do see like Jon Stewart. Sorry, Jay Stu, but I see him as a person. I see him as a person that I would follow. Like I would just be like, you know what, like Grandpa Stewart, I'm with you. Let's go.
He'd love that. I'll email him. I'll be like, hey man, are you from the tribe of Dan?
I didn't even think about that part. Oh, geez.
Anyway, no biggie if
Matt,
not TTYL.
Your liberalism is showing.
I know, but it's not about that. It's about growing up with somebody that I trust.
His source.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, he's kind of a conscience of America, regardless, again, of political ideology. There's a funny story in 2014. A U.S. Republican politician, Ryan Zinke, accused Hillary Clinton of being the Antichrist. He's very public about it. He's very serious. He was like, I read the Bible. I see the signs. Think about it, people. Do your own research. Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist.
Is that what that Ace of Base song was about?
That's what every Ace of Base song is about.
Even all that she wants is another baby?
I thought it was the sign. That's
a different one.
Yeah,
no, that's the one you're talking about. I saw the sign. Yeah, that's the one. And
I am happy now living without you.
I am happy now living without God. Yes.
But you're right. She wanted a baby.
That's a different song. That's all that she wants is another baby.
The Antichrist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Antichrist is very into babies. So for different reasons. So this one story, the political circus that has replaced journalism in American discourse, they love stories like this. And it got so much press that during the Trump inauguration, former President Donald Trump Hillary Clinton made a big deal about specifically pointing out this riot guy and reassuring everybody that she was not, in fact, the scion of Satan sent to overthrow all that is good in the universe.
Thank goodness.
I don't think he believed her.
Oh.
Because, there's always that logic trap where you can say, well, that's what any Antichrist would say.
It's like Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and then, there's all the hits, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, who I just don't think he's a great guy. And
Not
then
a good person.
I don't think so. Yeah. But we did find at least one explanation for the trend of accusing a lot of of presidents in particular being accused of being the Antichrist. We are going to introduce you folks to a guy named Gerald Burton Winrod.
What a Winrod.
What a Winrod. I do like that, like a spin on Nimrod.
It's like a windbag and a Nimrod combined.
That's
which
somewhat
is accurate.
appropriate. Yeah.
No, I think so. He's a pro-Nazi, far-right evangelical from Kansas, who is largely responsible for the modern president is the Antichrist kind of rhetoric that we're sort of dancing around here. Winrod believed that FDR was a devil linked with, of course, the Jewish communist conspiracy. Wah, wah, wah. And, of course, that Hitler was cool and that he would save Europe from the communist horde. Winrod, man. That guy sucks.
Yeah, and he's a heck of a trendsetter because, again, after this, like, people who hear these predictions often don't, or these accusations often don't know that it comes from blood libel. It comes from this strong background of anti-Semitism. And then that's where things like the mark of the beast get folded in, but it's still not quite, I think, the strangest stuff. Maybe we talk about the mark of the beast, though, because we've mentioned it a couple of times. It's often called 666, right?
Oh, and really quickly before we get into that, Mark, Matt, you were absolutely right. Gerald Ford had assassination attempted on his life a couple of times, and one of them was by a member of the Manson family. Squeaky Frome tried to kill Gerald Ford in California, but you'd think the Mansons would be pro-Antichrist.
Well,
so maybe...
Is it Squeaky From or From? I can't remember, but I think it's
okay,
From.
Well, yeah, okay.
But no, it's fine. Dude, there is an entire show that's going to be coming out later this year called Rip Current that deals with the two assassinations against Gerald Ford by Squeaky, and there's another woman that attempted an assassination on him. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he survived both of them, perhaps because he had the mark of the beast.
He's
mark of the beast.
Demonic force field of some kind.
Right. Not just secret security. Who are you really working for? Answer: the Department of the Treasury. People need to understand how weird that is. Anyway, so the mark of the beast comes from Revelation chapter 13.
Which we briefly discussed earlier. The whole, the Whore of Babylon and the beast in this sort of end of times kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. And the idea is that the mark of the beast, similar to the concept of putting blood on your door in Egypt of old, the mark of the beast is kind of a parody of that. And regular humans, the Janes and Johns and so ons of the world, will have to have a mark of the beast on them if they participate in the society that the Antichrist runs. And over the years, as society is modernized, that quote-unquote mark has been interpreted as many things. Is it, for instance, this is really popular a few decades back, is it your social security number? Is it the UPC? All that other stuff?
Could it be the color of your skin, perhaps?
Well, yeah, or, a barcode or a chip, maybe, or something.
A vaccination?
I say the thing I said as pointedly just because that's one way it could be really disgustingly used to another race.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can be used, right? The concept of it could be used in a lot of ways, but there are strange technologies that, again, imagine if you're talking about something that would be a technology that allows you to exist in a in a society, if you don't have some kind of bank card or Cash App card or something like that, you really can't function in a lot of society today, right?
Sure. Yeah. And in days of old, you couldn't do it. Like, you might have to have a licensing system to live in a certain community. And if you didn't vibe with that, you would say, well, this is a mark of the beast.
Well, yeah. But most of it isn't an actual mark or an actual thing that's attached to the human body. Rob, what was that recent? There's a company we just heard from recently that is making a Star Trek thing that goes on your shirt that you could touch and be like, hey, computer, what's this?
Oh, there's a couple of different ones. There's one I've seen called Rabbit, and then there was another one. A little AI kind of personal assistant kind of.
But taking your phone technology, basically, or most of your phone technology, and putting it on you, right? Rather than a handheld device or something like that. And just imagine that iteration or two ahead. And it could be something that is like an implant, right? Or something that is a part of your body that becomes the mark, right?
And that's already, I mean, that is statistically inevitable unless there is an extinction event that affects humans immediately. Like, that is going to happen. The meat and the metal will continue to merge. It's just going to happen.
That's the most alliterative sentence I've heard all day, and I love it.
It's still kind of early. We'll get, we got some more, but yeah, I love that point because we also, again, we see interpretation, what is meant by a mark, right? Is it just like a signaling to the world? Is it something that goes inside you as a person? And then is it communicable? Will you be punished for not participating? The same way our pal Adso said the Antichrist would torture and execute people.
Yeah, maybe. Again, like, well, there are three ways, right? Adso said the first thing he's going to do is deceive people, and those he can't deceive, he's going to use fear to control. And if he can't do that, then he's going to throw you in a gulag, basically. But in a couple other instances, the mark is a hidden thing, and it only is on the Antichrist. It's not a part of followers or anything, right?
The birthmark, etc.
Yeah, take it back to the Omen series, and it is a hidden birthmark that has to be discovered. But nobody on the outside, like no one looking at this child, would know that's the Antichrist. But if you pull the hair back in a certain way, you can see it.
And then in other stories too, it's like a hidden sign, right? You know,
or on the hand. There's like a 666 in the hand somehow.
And the idea of this serves the conspiracy theory aspect or the folklore aspect, because in these stories, one needs, if you're the good guys, right, then you needed the ability to identify somehow the opposition. And so that's a huge part of it.
The ops. It's interesting too how one reason that this depiction of this kind of stuff in fiction and in popular culture at a time like maybe in the, well, as far back as it was beginning to be written about, but even in the 90s and stuff with like the Antichrist Superstar record from Marilyn Manson, this stuff was controversial. Like people were still freaked out by this kind of stuff. So to depict it felt a little dangerous, like a little edgy, and it freaked out parents. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there is great power to that, right? Because what you're doing then is you're leveraging one of the oldest, most dynamic stories in all of human culture, right? Religion aside, just touching on that idea of a very powerful force that has been around forever and is fundamentally, beat me here, Paul, is fundamentally opposed to you personally, unless you get the right mark, unless you switch sides. I don't know. And there's, like you mentioned, the fiction and the music aspect. It's so endlessly fascinating that the concern and interest in the Antichrist story encounters cyclical popularity, just like a satanic panic, another mass hysteria outbreak like the Screaming Girls of Malaysia. One of the big resurgences in this, I would argue there are two variables. First, how stable is the current world in which you live, right? Your current community, et cetera. Do you feel safe, secure, access to resources? Second, are there any particularly popular things in the world of novels and film and art Have any of them mentioned the Antichrist? Because if they do, that's a cheat code. That gets people interested. Shout out to the fiction series and later adaptations, Left Behind. It's a fantastic example of how fiction feeds the factual interest. Told you, alliteration.
Left Behind would also be considered of a certain niche of cinema that is, pretty religiously based. More so. Most movies and Hollywood stuff is pretty secular. Left Behind series is very much has a message and is sort of promoted by the Christian community.
Yeah, and it's a big example, but there's a lot of, like in the world of Christian-oriented fiction, there are a lot of similar things, and they're leveraging the story that everybody knows, at least in pieces, and they're saying, well, let's reevaluate it or recontextualize it through a more modern lens. I mean, look, the book series Left Behind, the first one comes out in 2005, and there are years of chaos that follow in the 2000s, and more people begin to search for answers behind the pandemonium. What if, they ask, just like those people centuries and centuries ago, what if the end times are coming, and what if they're happening while I'm alive? I hate to say it, but I see the trend. I kind of think a lot of people want to be around at the end of the world.
I think it's something that a lot of people feel they need to be prepared for some reason, which again, kind of like an apocalypse or, preparing for the zombies or, whatever it is, thinking about bunkers, thinking about survival buckets of food and all that stuff. It is maybe in the back of a lot of people's minds because you don't want to get caught off guard by something like that. You want to have the best chances of surviving, I guess, but it is weird to think that it would be surviving and maybe not really living for you know what I mean? Like life would be very different after whatever cataclysmic event, or if we're hitting up on the end times. I think it's that inner thing where you don't want to be a sucker. You don't want to be caught off guard.
But I see that. I do think there's a lot of validity to that. I think maybe those two impulses coexist in the same person, the same communities.
I've had a couple conversations with people recently who are convinced that this election coming up is like the last chance to save humanity from the actual end times. Which
like
is
the
like
spiritual, like Christian theological end times?
I think so. I'm not really sure, like what these individuals believe in their personal life about that kind of thing, like religiously, but something about the politics side of it intersecting with their religious life, it feels like they think the stakes are at that level.
Surely people have accused Taylor Swift of being the Antichrist as for her part in all of this. Remember the whole conspiracy about Taylor and being able to sway the election, and that it feels like the kind of rhetoric on the right was borderline she's the Antichrist kind of talk.
I feel you. I'm glad you bring that up because there is a bit of a soapbox I want to get on here. It's rare for women or female identifying individuals to be identified as the Antichrist. And I think that is historically unfair. Everybody should get a chance to be the big villain. So, more equality in Antichrist accusations.
So if Taylor were to be accused of being the Antichrist, that would be another big win historically for her.
Yeah, it'd be progress. Yeah. Add it to the accolades. And at least some of the success between these modern fictional interpretations, like Left Behind, or most notably The Omen, at least part of the success comes from this combination of long-standing Antichrist theory and later conspiracies surrounding what we talked about earlier, modern institutions. We love a global cabal. Modern Antichrist speculation folds into this stuff because it's an easy red string to connect.
I guess we haven't talked a whole lot about the idea that there are forces at work working to make sure the Antichrist is born and brought forth, like in Good Omens, the Terry Pratchett Neil Gaiman series that is also a really delightful TV series as well. The book rather came first, but that is all about these secret sects within, I believe, even the Vatican, and within that are like working to make sure the Antichrist is born, and maybe even to a lesser degree in like Kevin Smith's Dogma. But very, very much that's part of the stories. There's like, again, like in Rosemary's Baby, there's members of this kind of unnamed cult. No spoilers. Well, spoilers for a 40-year-old movie that are like working to make sure that Rosemary gets impregnated with the seed of Satan. And then they're going to raise the baby and all of that,
And there are things like Hereditary, which takes the same sort of plot line, just isn't specifically Satan. It makes sense. And when you think about the fear that people inherently encounter living in a globally connected world, you can see where the origin, the provenance of these things. The United Nations is an insane idea. I mean, if you went back in time and you explained it, people would tell you that's devilment. And if you the Bilderbergers, any global banking institution, corporations past a certain threshold, all of them have been accused of various shenanigans, stuff like this, some of it with validity, to be fair. But those cabal conspiracy theories, they inherited other earlier stories. They carry with them the burden of prejudice, us versus them ideologies, anti-Semitism. So like whenever you hear these things, we have to put on our thinking caps and remember the lesson from that old Winrod. Stories are another kind of technology. That's all they are. And like any other kind of technology, they can be weaponized for great and sometimes horrific effect.
No doubt about it. And last thought to leave us with for this evening's episode, what's next? We talked a little bit about Taylor Swift and what's going on and all of the chatter around this political cycle. But like, what's the true future of Antichrist rhetoric? Is it even maybe becoming a little obsolete as the world does get a little more secular, or at least this country? But I don't think religion's going anywhere.
Well, it's tough because the way some of the recent episodes we've done and historically do point us to small groups of people who do work in secret against humanity by selling goods that give us cancer, by
weapons,
circumventing, by building weapons and then finding ways that those weapons need to be sold, or at least pushing, right, for the need for those weapons to be sold.
Starting war.
But again, like for me, it goes back to consumerism and some of the globalization that there are groups of people that are all about profit. And they don't care if they're actually hurting people. And that goes to an individual level, but also to individuals working together for profits and shareholders and all that other stuff. So I can see why this would continue on, guys. Like I can see Antichrist concepts and people, fingers being pointed at people saying you are the Antichrist. I think it's going to increase.
I think it's going to continue. I mean, it's a story that resonates with people because people do conspire against one another and do attempt to, for good or for ill, they attempt to paint folks they don't like as villains, because you don't want to have someone you don't care for be thought of as the good guy. You're the hero of your story. And that's part of the, even back to the early days of tribal warfare, religious ideology is often a rationalization to say, here's why I should have the resources and you should not. But
we also don't want people causing mass harm, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, and I think that in a weird way, I don't think that has anything to do with being the hero or not. I think that has to do with being able to look out in the world and say that person or that group is hurting us or others,
It's just such an easy concept to wrap your head around. It's the anti-us, it's the ultimate them. It's like my kid, I guess a lot of the kids are using the term the ops. And at first I thought it was just referring to cops, but it means my enemy. The opposition. Someone who is the opposite of me. And that's what the Antichrist represents. It's easy to wrap your head around the idea of hating that which is different than you or that which threatens you.
Right, because you deserve the resources. Mm-hmm. Not these nabobs. I'm bringing back nabob.
I love it. Was that ever a thing? I love it.
I just heard it in Apocalypse Now, which I need to stop rewatching. Okay. But anyway,
maybe it's an acronym.
Yeah, maybe it is. Let's learn the etymology of that in a future episode. The idea of mass harm, though, is we have to remember the same people doing mass harm are often rationalizing their actions. So from their from their perspective, they are also the good guys. It just depends on what you see good as. It goes back to our original question, nature of good and evil. I mean, it's exciting, I think, to explore the idea of the Antichrist evolving in the future. We know it's been happening, it's still happening, and there are a lot of changes on the horizon. Space exploration, cloning, corporations, so-called artificial intelligence, space Antichrist, AI Antichrist. No,
sure.
Something better.
Oh,
something
dude,
better.
When are people going to start accusing artificial intelligence of being the Antichrist?
That's what I'm saying.
No, I love that. No,
Well,
oh my
wouldn't
God, yeah.
Wouldn't it be the perfect Antichrist?
Oh, yes, it sure would.
It's completely of man, of the world.
Yes.
There is no God
and
to
it
it.
shows us progress. It's progress, guys.
Yeah.
It's helping us. It's a tool, and then it eats all of our lunches.
It's
wow.
kind of I've been working on a related story with something like that. It's interesting. We'll see if it works.
We'll keep working on it. I want to hear it.
All right. Yeah, I'll send it along. I don't know if it's good, but I'll send it along. So I wonder then, like, can we, now that we know these texts are reinterpreted, recontextualized, and they respond socially, right, to the pressures of the day, then I agree with you guys. I think humans will see new threats and fears emerge, and then they'll see them through the shadow of that ancient story. And so the Antichrist as a concept will evolve, and it will assume a shape that personifies the fears of that modern age. AI Antichrist, you know what I mean?
Dude, I can see a clear picture, guys. It's a huge warehouse, and you have 666 supercomputers. They are laid out in a pentagram.
Can it eventually sprout robot tentacles and just start careening through the city?
And it takes a while. You get like 30 minutes into the film until someone figures out that they move along ley lines. Right. And we have the info dump exposition. Yeah. So I don't know. It makes sense in times of mass uncertainty, of fear and privation. People wonder if, this is the moment where the house of cards collapses, whether with a bang or a whimper. Shout out T.S. Eliot. All good stories have a villain. Humans need an explanation for why bad things happen to good people. It's a question that hasn't been answered yet. And so the Antichrist fits the bill on all of those things. Whatever shape these new stories take, the people telling them are going to do one thing for sure. They're going to assure you the story they're telling you is true, and it's the stuff the devil doesn't want you to know.
The end.
Or is it?
I'm looking forward to the tentacled supercomputer Antichrist.
It's so metal.
I will do your bidding. I will follow you into the dark. And hey, this episode was brought to you by The First Omen. Please don't forget to catch it in theaters on April 5th. We're super excited to see it. We talked about a lot of Antichrist fiction and film in this episode, and I'm thinking this is going to be a pretty good addition to that canon.
And if you want to see the movie, remember, this is only in theaters, April 5th.
I can't wait. I can't wait to go see this with you guys. I love this kind of stuff. And we hope that you enjoy it too. We want to hear your thoughts, especially if you have a conspiratorial take on the idea of the Antichrist that you think your fellow listeners either will enjoy or need to know. We try to be easy to find online.
Boy, do we ever. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff on X, FKA Twitter, on Facebook. We have our Facebook group, Here's Where It Gets Crazy, and on YouTube, where you can see Ben dressed up as George Washington. Or is it the actual George Washington time travel? You can also hear Matt sing about existential dread experienced by said presidential time traveler.
It's a banger of a song, folks.
It's been in my head all week. Or if you want to find us on TikTok and Instagram, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Oh, and before we move on, just a quick shout out to everybody. Thank you for tuning into that stuff. We're hoping it's a series, no spoilers. And yes, someone reach out to Brad Neely. You are a guiding light, my friend.
Yeah, man. And for somehow the whitest kids you know, it's still, they always come up whenever there's an American president sketch for me. It's every time. It's the Abraham
Hammered
Lincoln one.
in the butt.
It's that's the one every time. All right. Hey, we have a phone number. It's 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, you've got 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname. Say whatever you'd like. Just at some point, let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. But if you don't want to do any of that stuff, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the folks who read every single email we get. Take care. The Void may write back 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tell us what's on your mind. Send us the links. Send us the photographs. Conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.